We are back, remembering Dynasty, bums, and a whole lot more with the host of the show, Peter Golenbock. I'm Ralph Tyko. Hello, Peter. My co-host, by the way, is Alan Blumkin, our co-host. And how you doing this week?
Actually doing extraordinarily well.
Tell me why. I like good stories.
Because I live in Florida.
Right.
It's beautiful out almost every day.
Right.
I have a fantastic wife. I'm healthy.
Yes.
What else?
Have your memory?
Yeah, I still can remember things. So what else could a person want?
Nice. See, ladies and gentlemen, this is an example of how to live life. Just look at all the positives, and the negatives will take care of themselves. The positives will always outweigh it. Alan, how are you doing this week?
I'm hanging in there. I'm very happy the Pirates went into Milwaukee, which has been a house of horrors for them over the years, and they swept 4 games from the Brewers, and they're tied with the Cardinals on the all-important loss column for the wild card in the National League now. And
it's going to come down to those teams and the Mets.
The Yankees both coughed it up today, but it's very, very hard to play Sunday games after a Saturday game.
Oh yeah, generally it's a day game, and that's
what won. The Yankees were shut out, but Sanchez got 2 of their 8 hits.
Okay, let's get on to the topic of the day. I wanted Alan, who is an incredible maven of the times, to talk to Peter about the 1949 to 1953 dynasty of the Yankees. I mean, the whole thing has been one big dynasty all through history with a few little glitches. But this one was the dynasty of my youth. And Alan is a few years older, but there were we were noting off air that there were only 12 that played for all 5 teams, all 5 winning teams. I want you, Alan, to ask Peter about any one of those folks that you're curious about, and we'll get the conversation rolling.
Well, my favorite topics were outside Yogi, of course, were the big 3 pitchers who. With the aces.
Now the two of you have totally confused me, because I thought what you were talking about were 12 players who played on the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Giants.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
You totally confused me.
Well, it was the 12 players that played from 49 to 53, and with the confusion, there were the 3 of them were that pitching staff, and you interviewed.
You're talking about no. Now let me see if I understand what you're talking about. From 49 to 53, there were 12 players who played all 5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
I just didn't know what you were talking about. Yeah.
All right. Well,
okay.
Now we know.
And 3 of those were Rashi, Reynolds, and Lopez.
Yeah,
is that
all
what you're
of them
saying?
by the end of 1955.
Those 3 and Whitey Ford, he was the 4th, provided the sort of the basis for Yankee champions 49, 50, 51, 52, and 53. I mean, they were stunning. And when I did Dynasty, I had the opportunity to travel to the homes of each one of them. Allie Reynolds lived in Oklahoma, and he was the president of the Atlas Mud Company, which was fabulous.
Well,
do you know why? You know why that's important?
He made a profit off of mud. What is he better?
Yes,
right?
And the reason was this particular mud was used in drilling. In other words, he owned an area that had mud, and that mud allowed the drills to drill. And he made quite a bit of money. He made quite a bit of money with his drill company. And he was the president of it. Lovely, lovely man. And you know, to go see him and hear him talk about, you know, his career. He was with I believe the Indians prior to the Yankees trading for him, and he made a huge difference on that staff. He was I think they traded a very important player, if I'm not mistaken, to the Indians, Joe Gordon.
They traded Joe Gordon, who was coming
I think it was
off a
right
season in 1946.
Mm-hmm. They traded Joe Gordon for Allie Reynolds, and it was a marvelous trade by George Weiss, the brilliant general manager of the Yankees. I went to see Vic Raschi. He lived in upstate New York. And when I went to see him, he owned a liquor store. And he was there in his liquor store, and I'd written to him, and I came, and I started, you know, hi, how you do, how are you? And basically, he started off by saying, I don't talk to reporters. That's how it started. And I thought to myself,
Steve Carlton.
Yeah, well, I thought to myself, this is really great. I've only traveled hundreds and hundreds of miles to see this guy, and he doesn't talk to reporters. But then what I did, I told him what I was doing, and he understood I wasn't a newspaper reporter.
You were a journalist.
Yeah.
Well, I was wanting to write history. I told him I was, basically I'm a historian, which is true, which is what I was. And he softened, and we had a wonderful conversation about his career. He was fairly bitter about how he left the Yankees because they wanted to cut his salary. He had gotten hurt, and they wanted to cut his salary, and he was fighting them. And Weiss, who was just one tough guy, decided to teach him a lesson, and at the same time let the rest of the players on the team know that he wasn't fooling around, and ended up trading Vic Raschi to the St. Louis Cardinals, which was very, very upsetting because Raschi had been a very, very important pitcher for the Yankees. The third pitcher, Eddie Lopat, lived in Hillsdale, one of those little hill cities in New Jersey. And I went to see him, and charming guy, really lovely. And the thing about Lopat, as opposed to both Raschi and Reynolds, was that Lopat threw slow. He had a lot of off-speed stuff, change-ups, curves.
Junk baller.
He was a very, very, very successful junk baller. I mean, he was a star, as were the other two. And he also, I think Eddie got to manage a little bit with Kansas City. He was a manager for a little while.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he was, his teams did very well.
That was under Finley. Yeah.
Was it under Finley? Well,
yeah.
Okay. So it was not the Arnold Johnson team where the Yankees managed to
right
kill all the best players.
I think it was the third manager after Joe Gordon and Hank Bauer.
Yeah. Okay.
Hank Bauer's first time with the A's.
Right.
Hey, you guys mentioned the A's.
Lovely
63
man.
And I think Lopat managed them in 63 and 64.
Mm-hmm.
They were awful.
And
it wasn't his fault. Just had nothing.
And changing the subject a little bit, the other pitcher of that great group was Whitey Ford. Now Whitey came up in 1950, and basically the rookie kid. I think his record was 9-1. Off the top of my head, and he helped lead the Yankees to the championship and to winning the World Series in 1950 against the Philadelphia Phillies. And what I loved about Whitey lived on Long Island, and at the time I was doing this book, I was living in the Roger Williams Hotel in New York City. I had a little business where I was renting for the hotel. I was renting out rooms 2 and 3 and 4 to a room to students. because this was 1974, and it was very difficult for students to find housing in New York for a decent price. And so I had bunk beds in the hotel room, and the hotel was hurting. And so I managed to run this business for a few years until every hotel in New York decided to do the same thing, put me out of business. But at any rate, Whitey lived in Long Island, and I called him up and I said, I'd like to meet you and talk to you. And he said, basically, where do you live? And I told him I was living in the Roger Williams Hotel, and he said, no problem, I'll come and see you. So I was living in this little teeny tiny room in the Roger Williams Hotel, and the great Whitey Ford comes. I mean, this is a measure of what a wonderful guy Whitey Ford was. You know, he was not a prima donna. He was not somebody who made you wait a half an hour in order to talk to him like, some people do.
He was from Queens. He was a Queens kid.
He was a Queens kid.
Yeah.
And just, wonderful. And we talked for a couple hours, and then he went off. There was a some sort of cartoonist dinner where they were actually honoring him that night. So he went from talking to me to the cartoonist dinner, and it was just, that's a wonderful thing about being in my profession. You get to meet all these terrific, terrific people.
Oh, I can somewhat identify, just
sure.
Given what I'm doing right at this very moment. So
one story I heard about Vic Raschi, and Peter could probably confirm it for me. In fact, I may have even read in your book that after games, he used to the reporters, he hated them so much that he would give one-word answers and spit tobacco juice on their shoes. He was Steve Carlton before Steve Carlton.
It doesn't surprise me.
And
it was interesting, that he felt that way. He was he was like a Marine. He was a very tough guy. He was just one very tough cookie. And I just imagined while I was talking to him what it must have been like to have to face him. Because he and Reynolds were both the kind of pitchers that, if you looked at them cockeyed, they would throw one right at your head.
Oh yeah.
It was a different game back then.
Yeah, and when I heard, I was 10 years old and I was about to eat supper when I heard that he had been sold to the Cardinals. And my mother had to stay up with me all night because I became uncontrollably crying over that. I couldn't understand. I was 10. What the hell did I know? How they could do that?
That's the same way I felt when. Excuse me. I was just going to say that's the same way I felt when Mag Lee was traded from the Giants. I was the same age too, by the way. To the Dodgers, it was unfathomable. I could. And then Jackie was traded to the Giants. It's crazy.
That's true. First for a while, and then they sold.
Well, the two of you, I can tell you, are both certified baseball Michiganers.
Obviously.
Yes. I think we're a threesome on some level, don't you?
It could be.
Oh, yeah.
It could very well be, yes.
Could be. The jury is still out on that. Hey, let me ask you something about one of those guys that played on all five teams. He was Joe Collins. One of those Yankees I don't know anything about. Woodling and Bauer and war stories and this and that. Joe Collins was the most unheralded Yankee of those 12 guys.
Probably true.
Other than Charlie Silvera, but
Charlie didn't play.
Right,
Charlie
that's
didn't
what
play.
I mean.
Yeah.
But Collins played quite a bit, and why don't you tell me, Peter? Did you interviewed him? I assume. And
he lived. I think he too lived in New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken. I went to his home, and I interviewed him, and we talked for about an hour and a half. Not the most gregarious, not the most interesting storyteller of them all. This is only. Let me think. I interviewed him in 1973. So what are we in now? 2016?
Right.
43 years ago?
Yeah.
Sound like 43 years ago?
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to remember what we talked about 43 years ago?
Well, you probably do. I'm guessing,
No,
not
actually,
just what you talked about. What was he like?
he was lovely. He was lovely. He was thrilled that I had come to talk to him. That's the thing that I discovered. I mean, understand, this was the very first book that I wrote. So I was flying totally blind. Fortunately, I had in my short life a certain amount of experience as the sports editor of the Daily Dartmouth. And so I had, I had done it some, not a whole lot. Also, I had a certain arrogance that somehow I knew what I was doing.
Comes with the territory.
Which was amazing. I mean, somehow I did. And, and the other thing I had, and I can't downplay this enough. I had the cooperation of the Yankees. Marty Appel.
And you had a law degree, and the confidence that comes from having a law degree, you're not going to...
I had no confidence from my law degree. I had practiced law for 6 weeks.
Well, you knew you were going to make
hated every minute of it.
No?
No, I had confidence from being a Yankee fan. That's what you don't understand. My confidence came from the fact that I knew that every year my Yankees were going to win the pennant. That's where my confidence came from.
Well, that's very interesting.
I wasn't one of those lowly Dodger fans. They're pissing and moaning all the time.
I know,
shut up. Well, you Dodger fans, just shut up. The Dodgers were effective. The Dodgers were effective. The Dodgers won pennants in 52 and 53 and 55 and 56. They just couldn't beat the Yankees. Well, one time.
Well, they did beat the Yankees in 55.
One time, but let's not talk about that. One time they managed to beat the Yankees, but it was a total fluke. It was a total fluke.
Mantle didn't play in the last game.
And Mantle didn't play in the last game, so it doesn't count. So it doesn't count.
Some injury. He missed the
I'll see to it that the record books are changed in your honor.
Okay.
I have a few calls to make.
Thank you very much.
It shouldn't take long. There's the red tape, but I am going to use your name, Peter. So cuts through. That's going to cut through a lot of red tape.
Oh yeah, that's going to do you a lot of good. Oh, too funny.
You know what I'm amazed at? Your humanity and all the weeks we've been talking. You're just a regular guy. It's not. You go in 10 bestsellers, New York Times, you Google them, you got the books lined up, and I got to tell you, Dynasty and Bums, it's like an encyclopedia of humanity. You don't get stats in there, you don't get...
I hate stats.
Its personalities are... just as interesting as even more interesting.
Much more.
The personalities are everything. See, when I was with the Daily Dartmouth as the sports editor, that's what I told everybody. I said, I don't want these goddamn statistics. Nobody gives a shit about the statistics. I want to know about the people. You tell me about the people, and people will read it. And that's pretty much what it came down to.
I taught a class in the new school for a couple of years before the '94 strike killed it, and I only used numbers in context. I didn't use them very often.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
there's only a few numbers that really mean anything.
Numbers are numbers. Baseball. It was more about the flow of history and the types of personalities. I probably did too much off-field stuff during those courses. If I had a chance to do it again, I wouldn't delve into as much of the off-field business as I did.
Oh,
I was more fascinated by that as I was fascinated by who hit how many home runs when.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure. Makes perfect sense.
I think that's why this flows so well, the three of us. Plus, as Peter says, three Michiganers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It flows. That's going to go down. That's the posterity. 3 Michigan of baseball people.
Well, I mean,
hey,
I've always
guys.
contended. What?
Yeah,
Guys, what?
who do you want to talk about, Alan, and of those 12 players? Anything you'd like clarified with Peter?
Well, the thing that always fascinated me, I did a presentation at the Sabre National on these 5 teams back in 1986. And the fascinating is that the transition, that the only 4 players that played over 100 games each season at positions were Berra, Rizzuto, Woodling, and Bauer. I mean, you had DiMaggio to Mantle, you had Billy Johnson and Bobby Brown to Gil McDougald, you had Jerry Coleman to Billy Martin, and you had Johnny Mize, who doesn't get very much mention, and Joe Collins at first base. But to me, the Rock as a position player was behind the plate. And Peter, from what I understand, I've read in a number of places Yogi didn't like to talk about himself at all. Were you able to get him to talk to you freely?
Oh, yeah, I went to Yogi's mansion.
Yeah.
I went to Yogi's mansion and sat there with him and met his wife. And when I went to Marty Appel at the Yankees, and I said to him, I'd like to write a book on the Yankees. Will you let me use your huge archives? He said, you can use the archives, but you have to get a contract. You have to get a contract. And then, later he acknowledged to me that he didn't think that I would get a contract in a million years.
Yeah.
But I was working at Prentice Hall. That's where I was working as a lawyer and a writer. And I thought, this would be fun to write about, the Yankees. I'll go down and talk to the trade book editor and talk him to give me a contract to write a book about the Yankees. Not knowing, of course, is that you don't do that. Nobody walks into the editor's office, talks him into a book, and gets a contract.
Yeah.
I mean, that just doesn't happen, except that it happened. And so after I got my contract from Prentice Hall, I went back to Marty and said, okay, I got my contract. He looked at me like I had, landed on the moon.
That sounds like a Seinfeld episode.
Yeah, well, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I had the most marvelous year doing research at the Yankees, which on the one hand, the research didn't do me a damn bit of good, because when I sat down to write a book, it occurred to me that nothing in these newspaper articles were worth anything at all, and that I would have to go and visit all these players. And so I said to Marty, I said, I need to go see these guys. And so a friend of mine was the secretary for Mike Burke, and I asked her, I said to her, do you think that Mike would write me a letter giving me an introduction to all the Yankee players? And she said, oh, absolutely. I mean,
wow.
Mike Burke was the most wonderful person in the whole wide world. I mean, he was so urbane, and he loved literature, and he loved people in the arts, and he didn't say, who is this cockamamie character who wants to write a book on the Yankees? He wrote me this fabulous introductory letter, signed it, and I sent a copy of it to every single one of the Yankees, so that when I called, it wasn't like I was a stranger. It was like Mike Burke had said, talk to this guy.
It's called the pre-approach letter. Yeah.
Whatever it's called. I mean, it's called. The only one who wouldn't talk to me was DiMaggio, because he was afraid I would ask him about Marilyn Monroe. But I mean, Yogi and Mickey and Whitey and all these people, Mike Burke said talk, so they talked, and it was just a fabulous.
And they talked
thing.
about DiMaggio, of course, so that really.
Oh yeah, sure.
The book's not incomplete in any sense.
Oh no. The book's not incomplete at all, because, in a way, having DiMaggio being that sort of presence, sort of more reflected who he was than just about anything else. I had gone to the restaurant, the DiMaggio restaurant in San Francisco, and I talked, to his older brother Tom, who was running the restaurant at the time. And it's like, Joe or Noah here, it was that sort of thing, and I have a sneaky suspicion he probably was there. But it gave me a real feel for where Joe came from. I mean, the fact is that Joe's father did not want Joe or Dom, he didn't want these kids playing baseball. He wanted them fishing. And Joe DiMaggio couldn't stand the smell of fish. I mean, this was just not something that he was going to do. So I went to see DiMaggio, and I wrote this whole thing about how he had somehow managed to avoid me, which was perfectly fine. I mean, he was such a superstar that everybody I spoke to. I mean, I spoke to, a lot of the players who I went to see not only played in 49, 50, 51, 52, but guys like Joe Page, they were pitching for the Yankees in 42 and 43 and 44 and 45. So, I managed to develop a tremendous amount of wonderful information about things that happened before 1949 as well. I mean, the interesting thing is when I wrote this thing, I wrote, I think, 1,100 pages, and the editor took one look at it and said, cut this baby in half. And so I did. Interestingly enough, the current dynasty, the one that's out right now, I had found the original first 150 pages, which had been cut by 75 pages. I'd cut the stuff out about Larry MacPhail and how they left the Yankees, and George Weiss, and how MacPhail was going to fire Weiss, and all that interesting stuff that happened before 1949. And in the latest edition of Dynasty, the new publisher allowed me to restore the first 150 pages of that book.
How nice!
Well,
that is very cool.
It's just
who is the publisher,
cool.
and where can the book be bought?
You asked me that question. I'm going to have to walk over. I'm attached to my telephone, so I'm not even sure I can give you that. There it is. I see it.
All right.
I see it. It's a Dynasty and Bums. They made them both. Here, talk among yourself. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
All right.
All right. Hey,
because Yogi had
Alan.
the same thing. Yogi's
Alan,
mother.
let me just ask you something. We're going to talk among ourselves. Is this cool beans or what?
Very much so.
Okay. Just because I'm sitting here, I come off every episode that I do 7 days a week, it seems, with goosebumps. I mean, and Peter is just
Dover Press. Dover Press.
Dover Press. We were saying
Press.
bad things about you, Peter. We were saying. We
Dover Press.
Barnes and Noble, right?
Dover Press and on Amazon, and anybody can get it as they can. All of your books. I'm thinking, how many books? Talk about a book that isn't a bestseller that you were disappointed that it didn't become a bestseller. Yeah, I'm sure there were others.
Yeah, the other 50 of them. The other 50 of them.
You wrote 50 other books
that weren't bestsellers.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, I wrote one. I wrote one this past year called The Chairman, which is about the chairman of the Republican Party of Florida and how the Tea Party Floridians put him in jail. And I couldn't get any newspaper to say one word about my book. Not one single Florida newspaper would write about it. It was a terrible disappointment. Should have been a huge, huge seller. Called The Chairman. Then of course the Lenny Dykstra book where he cheated me out of my money. It did become a bestseller.
I know. So when we agreed that there's only going to be one guest that will never be on, the guy from
you can invite him on. He's a hoot.
No, but
Lenny's
now it's
a total hoot.
I wouldn't have Dykstra on it. I'm smart enough not to have you both on.
No. Hey, look, I guarantee you, if we were both on, we would get along great. We got along great for years.
Would because you're a mensch. I'm sure you would because you're a mensch. If he were on with me, and had he done that to me, I can guarantee you I'm not a mensch. We wouldn't get along. That's all. I respect the fact that you would take the high road, but you know what?
Well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to spend the next 3 years of your life in court?
Right.
How much money is that going to cost you?
Right, and how will
and
we
also
hide
to the exclusion of
and then
not
you get a
doing
judgment, and you couldn't collect on it because
that's right, exactly, because he's hidden all his money. Exactly.
Right.
I'm telling you, he and Donald Trump could be twins.
Well, I thought last week it was Steinbrenner. Right? I headlined one of our shows. Steinbrenner and Trump are twins.
Yeah, well, they are too.
All those people are the triplets, for Christ's sake.
Well, these are the people who are, totally self-absorbed. Totally self-absorbed. The only thing that matters is them, and they're convinced that they're the smartest people in the room. That they're smarter than you are. You're the writer, but he's still smarter.
And how many senators feel the same way about themselves? How many Congress people? How many?
Well, probably half of them. Probably half of them do.
Yeah.
You talk about politics. I'm always amazed that these people could spend, 2 years of their lives fighting it out, to be a senator or a congressman or a president or. It's just the investment in time and money is just unbelievable.
Well, it's an adversarial daily grind.
And it's become that. It didn't
so
used to
we
be
have
that.
up here for a state legislature.
Yeah. It didn't used to be that. It just, when the Republicans in the 1970s decided to make this war, that was the start of it. It really was. You saw.
Well, it's Ronald Reagan, basically. It was Ronald Reagan.
Well, it was Reagan and his buddies. Absolutely.
Yeah, well,
And you saw what Bill and
killed
Hillary
the middle class. He killed the airplane.
He did.
And he killed.
Yeah.
Right. And I
all
think
of that
he
is
set
true.
the precedent for the rest of the unions going downhill. Right there.
He absolutely did. No, that's true. All of that is true.
And he gets such criminals, Rumsfeld and
yep.
Ali North hiding
the first one
shit in the White House.
Yeah.
Well, did he know what was going on? If he knew, that was a crime. If he didn't know, then he was demented. And how could he not know?
Ralph, you can't call this stuff crimes. They're not crimes. It's politics. It's just the way it works. You've got the Citizens United, where companies from anywhere in the world can spend money on these campaigns. It's unconscionable. You had, how many members of the Supreme Court? What was the decision? 5-4. You had 5 people: Alito and Justice Thomas and all these people. The idea was to make the Democrats
and a
disappear
conservative
forever.
turned over, which is amazing on that one.
Yeah, when Scalia died, Thomas had to find somebody else to tell him what to do.
Yeah, he did.
Tie his shoes.
It's absolutely true. We're not talking about baseball anymore, We've swapped the subject.
Let's get back.
I think we probably should go back.
Peter,
yeah.
what kind of a person was Johnny Mize?
He could not have been more lovely. He was a big guy. Johnny Mize was a bull. I met him on Marco Island is where he was. He was there for some sort of cockamamie convention. And I stopped there, and he sat and talked with me for an hour and a half about his years with the Giants and also, of course, with the Yankees. Look at Johnny Mize's numbers. He was, when he retired, one of the 5 greatest home run hitters of all time. This guy was absolutely amazing. He struck out fewer times some years than the home runs he hit.
Yeah.
Which never happens. It's just astounding. He was related in some funny kind of a way to Babe Ruth. He showed me he was wearing Babe Ruth's watch, which just impressed the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Well, not everybody can wear Babe Ruth's watch, but for Johnny Mize to wear it, I thought to myself, that makes a certain amount of sense. And, the guy he couldn't have been more lovely. He was terrific. He really was.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Who was a jerk in your dealings?
No. Not in this book.
Oh,
no
okay.
jerks. No jerks.
Okay.
No.
Good.
No. If you ask me who were some of the wonderful people, the
that's
wonderful
great.
people.
That's the best. I'm not looking for dirt. I just
No, I understand. No, there were no
gut reaction of who you
the
like.
people who I enjoyed the most. Among those were Phil Rizzuto. Phil Rizzuto was incredibly a wonderful storyteller and entertaining.
Oh.
I mean, he was a sort of self-effacing guy who loved to tell stories about himself. So, he and Cora were going to get married, and on the night before their wedding, at the ball game, the players all ganged up on him, pulled his pants and underpants off, and painted his genitals purple with something called gentian violet. His genitals violet, so that on his wedding night, Cora would look at him and go, "What the hell happened to you?"
They would put snakes in his glove and what?
They would. They sent him on a snipe hunt. If you know what a snipe hunt is, I don't even know if they do that.
Anybody who went to summer camp knows what a snipe hunt is.
Knows what a snipe hunt is. They would take the poor sucker out and give him a bag and say, "We're going to catch snipes," and you put the snipes in the bag, and they take him out in the middle of nowhere, and as he was looking for snipes, they'd all disappear. So that he'd be all alone in the middle of nowhere.
Middle of the woods at night.
So they did that to him. And then a couple of weeks later, they said to him, "Look, we've got this other guy. We're going to take him out on a snipe hunt, and we want you to be the sort of the lure. When he sees that you're there, he'll come too." So they took him out again, and they all ran off, leaving him all alone again in the middle of the night. But they loved him. They loved this guy. Everybody loved Phil Rizzuto. I mean, the smartest.
His Hall of Fame
smartest
is on YouTube.
What?
His Hall of Fame speech is on YouTube.
Oh, it's on YouTube? Oh, he could not have been more charming.
Months ago, and it was still as funny as it was when he did that back in 1997, I think.
Well, and the smartest thing they did, I mean, George Weiss, you talk about what a bastard George Weiss was.
Yeah.
So in the middle of 1956, he calls Rizzuto in and says, "Look, we've got to release a player. And I want you to pick out the player that we're going to release." So he picks out a couple of the 11th and 12th pitcher on the staff, and Weiss goes, "No, we got to keep them." And he points out a couple of utility infielders, and Weiss goes, "No, we got to keep them." And of course, the person that Weiss is releasing is Rizzuto.
Right.
And anybody else. And anybody else.
On Old Timers Day, he did this.
On Old Timers Day. That's what a bastard Weiss was. Though I'm sure Weiss didn't see himself as being a bastard. I don't think so. He just was. And anyhow, anybody else would have gone, "You son of a bitch, you brought me up here to choose myself as the guy that you want to cut?" Phil never said a word. He was crying his eyes out, but he got in his car and he drove home. He was a gentleman. And about a week later, they came up with the absolute brilliant idea of hiring Phil Rizzuto to be the third guy in the booth with Mel Allen and Red Barber.
Oh.
And Phil Rizzuto was in that booth for 40 years?
Right.
And he was magnificent.
Good announcer at the beginning.
Oh, he was.
Before he became a caricature of himself, he was a really good announcer with a voice.
He was, but he was a color guy more than a play-by-play guy. He was a color guy, and what he was more than anything else was a deep connection for all those people who love the Yankees to their childhood. For a lot of people, is what he was.
Oh yeah.
And then, of course, the other thing that happened, and nobody could have known that it was going to happen, when they brought Bill White in to be his partner. Those two people were like Mutt and Jeff, and they were so utterly entertaining and wonderful, and you just loved listening to the Yankee broadcast because of Phil Rizzuto and Bill White. Rizzuto used to call him White. Hey, White. And they were just wonderful. I remember when I was living in New Jersey, I was driving home on the New Jersey Turnpike, and Phil is in the middle of a ball game, and he's talking to the Statue of Liberty. I mean, no other announcer in the middle of a ball game would be talking to the Statue of Liberty. And I remember thinking to myself, this guy is just so unique and so wonderful. We are so lucky that we have him. And we had him for a long time. We really did. We were lucky that we had him.
All those guys were a different breed. They had gone to war before all this happened.
Well, that's certainly so. Yeah.
Bauer.
Bauer. They were all on D-Day. Yogi was on D-Day. Bauer was on D-Day. I think Houck was on D-Day. These guys showed up on the Omaha beaches.
Oh, Bauer was in the Pacific.
June 6th, 1944. They were there.
Yeah, Bauer was in the Pacific.
They were there. Yogi was telling me about it. It was like, holy smokes, they're shooting at us. Yeah, no kidding.
Really?
I read a story that Bauer, the Yankees went to Japan after 1955. And the State Department here booked some Japanese official, and he asked if anybody had ever been to Japan before. Bauer raises his hand and starts spouting off all the islands. When he was island hopping, when he was in the Marine.
That's right.
And the Japanese guy turned all sorts of shades, and the meeting ended.
I don't know about the meeting ended, but yeah, no, that's absolutely true. The other thing that was interesting about Rizzuto that nobody seems to talk about was that he was one of the very, very first ex-ball players to become an announcer. Before that, almost everybody who was in the announcing booth came up as, announcers. They weren't athletes. They were announcers. Mel Allen was an announcer. Red Barber was an announcer. One of the other first ones was Dizzy Dean.
Oh, yeah.
Dizzy Dean was the other one who was one of the very, very, very first athletes who became an announcer on the radio and on TV. And when Rizzuto was invited into the booth by the Yankees, Barber didn't want him. Phil told me that Barber could not have been more nasty to him, basically trying to freeze him out. It took a couple of years before Barber came to understand that little Phil was not going away. Barber could be a real bastard when he wanted to be.
Well, I can tell you that my mother worked with his daughter at Long Island University. She worked in the library. And his daughter was a woman who happened to be gay. And
isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting?
Right? He never accepted her in their lives.
I'll bet not. Isn't that? I never knew that, and that's just a wonderful piece of information. Tommy Lasorda was the other one who had a gay son and refused to acknowledge that he had a son.
Right.
That's why I'll never forgive Lasorda for what he did.
Oh,
and the other thing was
he traded away Burke because they were having an affair. He and the kid that died from AIDS,
Glenn Burke,
I think. Yeah. I think his name was
Glenn Burke. Glenn Burke was gay, and Tommy's son was gay, and they were friends. I don't know if they were having an affair, but they certainly were friends.
And it wouldn't matter if they were to any thinking human being, and his daughter was not that. For that
this is the 1960s. It took, gay rights only came into being really in, the last 10 years? In this country?
Gay rights did, but gay acceptance came in. For a lot of people accepted their children long before it. And, I mean...
let's put it this way, not as many as should have. I can tell you that.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was a lot later, by the way, with Glenn Burke. It wasn't the 60s. It was well into the 70s.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah. But I'm just saying... Anyway, gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. And
you're welcome.
You're welcome.
Let's do it next week.
And
same place next.
Sure. And it's not my show, by the way. This is not my show. This is your show.
Same bad time, same bad channel.
Yeah. I'm visiting.
Yes.
I'm the visiting team.
Yes,
You're the home
my
team.
show. They come to hear me, Peter. That's what they come to hear.
They do.
See you later. 50 books, 10 bestsellers. Goodbye.
Take care, guys.
Okay, Ralph.
Bye, Alan. You're amazing on your own.
One little thing, after you hang up, you'll appreciate this.
Okay. Let me turn it off and we'll talk.
Okay, just a couple of seconds, okay?
All right. Everybody out there, I'm going to get to talk to Alan Blumkin, and you're not. And I'm very lucky to be able to do that. Thank you, Peter. You aren't on the line anymore. Tell you all out there to keep on keeping on, and we're going to do it next week. Adios, everybody.